Welcome to the I-80 Club and another edition of the I-80 Football Show. Josh Peterson here as always, and I very much appreciate you taking the time for joining me for another episode, and this one is a lot of fun. A longtime friend of yours truly, Ryan McGee of ESPN, ESPN.com, SEC Network, College Game Day, SEC Nation. Marty and McGee joins me for a wide-ranging conversation about college football in 2025, the state of the sport, the season that we have seen so far, some of the storylines that we have been watching, and a little Nebraska as well. This one was so much fun for me to do. I've talked to Ryan many times over the years on the radio, but I've never had a chance to sit down with him for as long of a conversation as you're about to watch or listen to. And so I really hope that you enjoy this one. We've been doing the I-80 Football Show all throughout the season. We have had some killer guests so far, Ryan included. Last week, we had a couple of NFL folks on. We have done multiple conversations with college football writers and reporters. Bill Connolly joined us to talk about his new book in college football in 2025, ahead of the season, Noah Eagle, and so much more. So if you missed any of the episodes, would love for you to go back and check those out. And certainly a like and a subscribe here on the I-80 Club YouTube channel to make sure that you don't miss a single episode moving forward. We have some more great guests planned for the next few weeks. And if there's anyone that you would like to hear from on the I-80 Football Show, just let us know. Interstate80club at gmail.com, Interstate80club at gmail.com. That is where you can reach out to us. Still to come over the course of the next few days, Ben Stevens with another Big Ten breakdown, getting you ready for this weekend's matchups. That will be out on Friday morning, wherever you get your podcasts, or right here on the I-80 Club YouTube channel. Coming up on Saturday, Jack and I not only will have a Saturday morning coffee show, but we're going to do a watch party right here on the I-80 Club YouTube channel for the entirety of Nebraska and Michigan State. We would love to have you join us for that one. So that will come up starting about 2:55, 3 o'clock ahead of the game on Saturday afternoon. We'll do an abbreviated post-game show that night as well, and then so much more. We'll have a Before the Witching Hour on Sunday, getting ready for the NFL. Volleyball State exclusively for subscribers. Speaking of them, they're doing a volleyball late on Friday after the Nebraska-Penn State match. Patreon.com/I-80 Club if you would like to get access to that, whether it's the Volleyball State tier or the community tier, gets you access to everything that we're doing. The content tier, you're going to get most of what we have from the I-80 Club. And again, it's patreon.com/I-80 Club. Enough of all of the intros and enough of what we have coming up. Let's get to Ryan McGee of ESPN joining me today on the I-80 Football Show. So happy to welcome on to the I-80 Football Show this week. I've had him on my radio show many times, but making his I-80 Club debut today from ESPN, the co-host of Marty and McGee and the author of numerous books, it is Ryan McGee. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you?
I'm good. You know, it's October's just getting started, but it feels like I said the other day, college football season is a lot like, I have a daughter, right, who's like 20 years old, and some days it feels like she should be 2. And some days it feels like she should be 45. And that's kind of how it is when I hit October. Like, I love football more than anything in the world, but there are days when I'm like, wow, it's already week 6. And I'm like, damn, it's just week 6. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I know that feeling entirely, especially around here, given the stuff that we're doing. And I know what you're doing as well, and the balance of all of the other sports. You know, I was thinking about it this morning, Ryan. I have to imagine that there are a lot of college football people in your life that always are wanting to ask you about NASCAR. And then there are probably NASCAR people that are wanting to ask you about college football. And then I imagine even some of them are wanting to ask you about college baseball when all of that is overlapping. Does that allow you in a way to always kind of focus, always have one eye on what is going on in those sports in a way that maybe someone who is only doing kind of one thing at a time maybe wouldn't be?
Yeah, and it's I'm not good at it. I would love to say that I am. It's interesting because like this week, I mean, like as September wraps up and October gets going, so obviously college football is hitting its stride. We clearly didn't know what we were talking about. I mean, the top 10, only half of them were barely in the top 25, and now they're 3 of the top 6 are SEC schools that were all 18th and worse. I mean, that's going on. And I had this Lane Kiffin documentary, which was great and very excited about it, and launched that thing. And then, oh, by the way, the NASCAR postseason is eliminating people. And there's this whole fight going on about what the NASCAR postseason should even be going in the future. And all my Tennessee people are mad at me because I did a Lane Kiffin documentary. And also, Tony Vitello supposedly is going to be the manager of the San Francisco Giants. So, yes, all of that's happening all at once. Meanwhile, I have no idea what's going on in the NFL. I say that people can't believe this. I'm not a big NFL guy anyway. I like following the athletes that I covered in college. I live in Charlotte, go Panthers, whatever. But honestly, Monday Night Football, no offense to Troy and Buck, those two teams could run out there like Braveheart and stab each other, and I would find out maybe Wednesday. Like I don't have the bandwidth to keep. And I'm a Red Sox fan. I completely missed first game of the wild card. I just forgot because I have too much else going on. So my brain, my wife hates this analogy, but I always say my brain is like a city bus. There's only so many people can be on the bus, and it's like the rental car shuttle, right? It's just jam full of people. And you know what? Sometimes NFL, too many people on the bus. Y'all got to get off. But baseball wild card, Sox, I love you, but I don't have time. So yeah, it's the other two, and then when college baseball crashes it. I mean, I don't even know. I get the blue screen of death. Like, I don't even know what to do.
Yeah, I guess it's probably good then that you're not super into the NFL because a lot of us, I think, we watch the NFL on Sunday and it's like, okay, where can I fit any of my college football prep or anything into? So at least I guess you have that as a day to focus on that, to focus on NASCAR, etc.
Yeah, so so NASCAR races on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, we find out where we're going from Marty and McGee and SEC Nation. We find out on Sunday morning. Yeah, I wake up Sunday morning, saying Sunday morning is the only morning I have to not set an alarm, and I still wake up. No offense to church, I'm not going in the fall. It's just how it is. So I wake up and I look at my phone. We're going to Gainesville. So this week, so we're going to Texas at Florida. Mm-hmm. We were looking at going to Vanderbilt, Alabama. Then game day decided to go to that. We don't the two of us don't like to be in the same place at the same time. We're splitting an audience. So. All right, I thought we'd probably go to Texas A&M. We ended up going to Florida because it's a whole big reason. But anyway, so I'm literally laying in bed booking flights, trying not to wake up my wife, and now I got a picture and I did a game day. All this is going on Sunday while the Cup race is going on. So yeah, and then meanwhile, Seahawks, Chiefs, whatever, dude. I have no idea.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible.
Ryan, people have a fantasy football team? Hell no. When do I have time? When do I have time to worry about who I'm going to start at tight ends? No, I used to.
You know what? Maybe that could be a good thing for you that you're not focused on it. You could just throw your roster together, and you'd be like one of those guys that just wins, even though you don't have any focus on it. Yeah,
well, I that was me for a long time, and then finally I was just like, no, I can't. I do not have time to worry about did Justin Jefferson tweak his Achilles or what? I just don't. It's just so yeah. We're busy, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, certainly. Ryan, every year at this time, you finish September, and I think in college football we're always like, wow, it's been a really fun, wild start to the year. But I think for the second straight season, I can't but help saying it is again really wide open, and I don't think we could always say that. Certainly in my lifetime and yours. Do you agree with that? And I wonder if all of the changes that we have seen, if one of the huge positives is that we enter into an October and it's how many teams can win a national championship? And it makes these weeks so much more enjoyable than they were even maybe 5-10 years ago.
There's no question about it. And so I did the College Game Day podcast for ESPN on Monday. Reese Davis did not do it because his daughter got married in the fall, which is but it was on Sunday. I mean, she knows her deal. But I did the podcast with Dan Wetzel and Max Olson, Nebraska guy. Yep. And Dan Wetzel threw it out to us. All right, is this the best that college football's ever been? Mm. And Dan, loves to throw out those. I mean, he loves those napalm kind of topics and all. But my answer was yes, and the reason is because of what you're talking about. We live in this era where everybody complains about every kid gets a trophy and all that stuff, but you also want your school to be in the conversation, and not just for a conference championship or to have a decent bowl game and a nice winning season or whatever. But what are my chances of being in the postseason? And we all go back to the high holy altar of 2007, which is the greatest college football season of all time. Every team that was number one lost, or every team that had a chance to be number one would lose, and it went all the way through the conference championship games. And it feels like we're going to have that a lot. The reality is the history of college football is what it is. We all learned this during the CFB 150 stuff, which is the teams that were really good at football in 1940 were really good at football in 1970, and they're really good at football in 2025. But the conversation is broader now. And for all of the hand-wringing about the transfer portal, the world we're living in now is that John Mateer, no one had heard of him, and now he is the hero of the state of Oklahoma, right? And then the quarterback that he replaced that just didn't work out had a chance to go to Auburn and now has a second life. I mean, Bo Nix going to Oregon, and because the pressure of being a Nix at Auburn was just too much for the kid, and he was one of the most exciting players I've ever watched. And so we all complained about the player, the student athletes, whatever, that don't have any power. Now they have power. I don't want to hear him complaining about it, because now these players have a chance to, it's not working out here, I'm going to go somewhere else. The coaches have done that forever. Unfettered, could do whatever they want. The athletic directors, the assistants, everyone could do it except for the players. And the parity that has happened because of that is why we have what we have. I always go back to, it was a year ago this weekend when Vanderbilt stunned Alabama and we all learned who Diego Pavia was and all that. But I'll never forget, on SEC Network, as we were watching the Vanderbilt fans tear down the goalposts, the SEC Network studio here in Charlotte, right by my house, and Chris Doering, the great Florida receiver who's been with SEC Network forever, he said something that applies to college football now, and I don't think it's going to go away for a while. And he said, I think we're living in a time where the good teams aren't as good as they used to be, but the bad teams are way better than they used to be. And they're kind of meeting in the middle. And I think we don't know what's going to happen every weekend. And that's kind of what we want, and the reality is the big schools are going to get theirs. That's just how it's going to be. They'll figure out how to game the system. They have more money. They have more resources, all those things. But the fact that we have an expanded playoff and the fact that we have the ability to go get guys for your roster, and it's not about NIL. It's really not. A lot of these transfers are about Diego Pavia. Wasn't going to make him. He actually would have made more money to go to Nevada than he did to go to Vanderbilt. But Vanderbilt has given him the platform to be, in my mind, a Heisman Trophy candidate and, an undefeated team in the top 20. And so it's a really long way of saying, that's the era we're living in now. And I'm all for it. I really am, because I like not knowing what's going to happen every weekend. And I think college football, the biggest complaint we heard, particularly in the middle days of the college football playoff, were it's the same four teams. I'm tired of watching Clemson and Alabama. I'm tired of watching Georgia and Clemson. I'm tired of watching, Alabama. Okay, well, good. Now you look at that playoff field last year, everybody was in that thing. And so that's, I love where we are right now.
I couldn't agree more. And I want to throw a theory at you that I've been kind of ruminating on for a little over a year now. Like in the NFL, nobody goes undefeated, right? We had the Dolphins in 72, right. We had the Patriots in 07, and they lost in the Super Bowl. And that's because it's very difficult, but also there's this, it's okay to lose. We will be able to bounce back. Like, there's a part of me, Ryan, that wonders if it's not that a college football team Georgia didn't go into the game last week saying, we can lose, we're going to be just fine. But in the back of their head, every week doesn't have the same amount of pressure as it did 10 to 15 years ago. And I wonder if that just drops it down just enough, not to mention all the other things that you just mentioned. And that is what also allows for the weeks maybe to be a bit more topsy-turvy, again, than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that what we all were worried about and we're all saying is you don't want to ruin the integrity of the regular season.
Yeah.
But, Oregon and Penn State are both going to be fine, right? They both, there's no scenario where both of them still don't have a chance to play for a Big Ten title or be in the college football playoff. They both were entered a year ago. Look, last year, the only team that made the semifinals with only one loss was Notre Dame. And that loss was to Northern Illinois, right? Everyone else had two losses, including Ohio State, obviously, who won the national championship. And so your chances of winning a championship aren't over, but there was no lack of intensity in that Oregon-Penn State game. And there was no lack of excitement for Oregon for winning, and no lack of just soul crushing emotion for Penn State fans. I mean, I was in Athens, Georgia on Saturday for Alabama, Georgia, and Alabama's back is against the wall because they already had a loss. But in Georgia, more than likely is going to be okay. They lost to Alabama a year ago, and they still made the college football playoff and won the SEC. But the reality was that affected nothing in that building. Like, no one wanted to win any less. At no point did anybody get out of the throttle in the fourth quarter. All right, you know what, though? It's good. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. No one was thinking about that. You look at Kirby Smart, who knows? He does the math every 10 minutes. He knows they're still okay as far as what their December, January goals are. But that was a man who was crushed and was disappointed and was hurt. And so that hasn't gone away. And I think and it's still early, I get it, but that's the part that I think a lot of people, the narrative they're trying to sell, and a lot of the people that are trying to get a lot of this policy sold, they're trying to sell that, which is, we're the soul of the game. And that's not true. I mean, and the other part of it is, I was worried about this NIL because I see it in the NFL locker rooms. When I did cover the NFL and I was in the Panthers locker room a lot, there was animosity if a guy got a big contract, and other guys, or if a guy did a lot of TV commercials or was in movies. I lived in the Cam Newton era of the Panthers, and there was a lot of animosity in the locker room. The hell, this guy's doing all this other stuff, and the rest of us aren't doing any of it. And that's not really happened. It's happened a little bit, but you may be among the top 2% of those that are making money. The reality is the coach-player relationship still matters. Even though it might not last as long as it used to, the relationship with the players in the locker room still matters. And I see it. I see it all the time. A Joey Aguilar shows up in Knoxville, and immediately everybody in the locker room is like, all right, we like this guy, and you see it with all these transfers. So listen, it's not perfect, but man, I think it's probably a lot better than a lot of people would have predicted.
Yeah, absolutely. One more on this round before we get to the current storylines of the season. I want to ask you about the SEC viewpoint of everything. You're living in SEC country, or I guess close enough to it. You obviously went to Tennessee. Like, there's a lot of discussion of why have they taken maybe a bit of a step back and the Big Ten has taken a step forward. And everybody, of course, always says, well, now that it's legal, the SEC doesn't have the advantage they once did. I wonder what you make of that discussion. And I mean, it's so weird, right? Like, they're still going to have good teams. They're going to have great teams. They could win a national championship this year. But it does seem like this is one of the more intriguing storylines, big picture-wise, in college football right now.
And I think it's that same idea of, I mean, everybody's kind of gravitating toward the middle. Mm-hmm. And the question is, where are you, and kind of figuring out the business model. And listen, I was on the field during the post-game celebration after Ohio State won the national championship, and the first player that grabbed me and I talked to him was Judkins, the running back. And the reason I knew him was because he was a great running back at Ole Miss, and he's from Atlanta. And in no universe was he going to Columbus, Ohio in the wintertime until now. And, made a lot of money, won a national championship, and the promise was to win a national championship. And so that's the world we're living in now. And it gives people hope. That's the thing too, is Florida State wins 2 games, and then they go get 45, 50 players or whatever it was. And now they're, with the exception of Virginia, and they're at least in that conversation for a national championship with a chance to beat Miami this weekend. There's hope now. Now you talking about the NFL, there's the teams, the Chiefs, and that group that they're up, the Patriots forever, the group that's at the top tier. And then there's the teams that just, Raiders, wherever, that are terrible, and it's just how it's going to be. But then there's the 8-8 group in the middle. And they always stay within 2 or 3 games of 8-8, and they stay there for 20 years. And again, this is a guy, as I talked to you, I'm sitting 15 minutes from Panther Stadium. You get in that group, it's hard to get out. In college football now, it used to be a huge group of those teams. And now, Indiana, right now, you have a chance to make a move and to improve very quickly. And if you make a mistake and your roster is junk, you can start over. And those guys don't want to be there anymore when they're losing. It's not like we're pushing anybody out. A lot of those guys are leaving anyway. So it's a long way of saying there's still a business model adjustment that's happening. Yeah. And now you're right. Now the way that you were doing it somewhere else, you can do it like that anywhere now. There's no question about it. And the map lines don't matter as much. I think you see a lot more players from Florida and from Georgia and from Louisiana that were always going to stay in the Southeast. They're willing to look out west, and they're willing to look to the Midwest, and they're even willing to look a lot further north because, if they think they have a chance to go somewhere and play and make a little money, then they're probably going to do that, whether that's close to home or whether it's a long ways away. And Judkins is the one I think about all the time because he won a national championship in Atlanta, and all his friends and family were there. Literally grew up not far from the stadium where he just won the national championship. And there he was playing for a team in Columbus, Ohio. And when I asked him about, what's it going to be like when you go home, he goes, they're going to have to buy a coat because those guys, but now you're willing to make those moves. The world has gotten much smaller. The college football world has map wise. And I think that certainly has played into the Big Ten's hands.
Yeah. His former school, of course, Ole Miss, you mentioned a few minutes ago, the recent piece that you did on Lane Kiffin, the many lives of Lane Kiffin. Ryan, what is most striking to you about his evolution as a person and as a coach? Because he has been one of the more interesting figures we've had in the sport over the last couple decades.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up. It's on the ESPN app now. There's actually, we call it the director's cut. There's stuff in there that wasn't in the version that aired, on ESPN back on the 24th. But it's I have been around Lane Kiffin since we were kids. When his dad, Monty Kiffin, inventor of the Tampa 2 defense and a legend, when his dad's only head coaching job was at North Carolina State in the 80s, I was a kid growing up in Raleigh. My dad was an ACC referee. Couldn't work NC State games because we lived in Raleigh. That's the rule. But he could work all the scrimmages and practices. So Coach Kiffin would have all the local ACC refs come work practices to work on rules changes, and they could get reps, and his players could have discussions with the officials. All was great. So my brother and I would go over there, and we play pickup football with the coaches' kids. And there was this one little 6-year-old brat that was calling DPIs and holding and would yell at you if you didn't run the right route or whatever. And I knew his name was Lane because his dad was always yelling at him, Lane, shut up, Lane, you're making too much racket. And so fast forward 20 years, my brother calls and he goes, I think that damn mouthy kid from NC State just got the Raiders job. And so we've been around. I've been around. Lane denies that story, by the way, but his dad totally backed me up. His dad was like, "Oh no, that's exactly how that went down." But but to the question, his openness and his willingness to talk about his own evolution, and when we went to Ole Miss 3 or 4 times over the course of the spring and the summer shooting that documentary, and the last time we were there was at the end of July, and we shot the scene that you see in the film of Lane having dinner with his family, with his ex-wife and his kids and his brother and his brother's kids. And it was cool. And but that night, leaving the house, standing in the driveway, Lane shook my hand and he goes, I really hope this helps people. And I didn't see that coming. And he wanted to share his story about, he wasn't like a dangerous drunk, but alcohol certainly had affected his life and it affected his health. And who goes to Ole Miss and quits drinking? No one. No one goes to Oxford and quits drinking, and he did that. And then not just that, but turning 50, getting in better shape physically, getting in better shape mentally, spiritually, and then a second chance at being an in-person father. And see, he said, and how do you handle embarrassment at your job, and how do you handle mistakes that you've made? And that's honestly what his goal was in this whole thing was, all right, I'm going to lay it out there. And now since the documentary aired, the contact I've had with Lane is people, he's sending me screen grabs of texts he's receiving from people who've watched it and said, this has helped me with my marriage, or this has helped me as a father, or this has helped me with my struggles. And I didn't see that coming. And that's certainly not a goal that Lane Kiffin would have had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago. And so I believe him, and I think he's going to stay at Ole Miss for a while. Listen, I've been wrong about these things before. That's well documented. But as I sit here right now, I believe everything he said.
What would, Ryan, an SEC championship or at the very least like a playoff berth mean for that program? They haven't won a conference title since 1963. They won a few natties within a handful of years back in the late 50s, early 60s. Like, what would it mean for them to finally get over that hump that they haven't even made an SEC championship game, let alone won one in 60 years.
No, it's shocking because you think of Ole Miss as a football school,
Yep.
and you think about Archie Manning, and you think about Eli, and you think about all these great players that have Deuce McAllister, all these great players that have come through there over the years. Johnny Vaught was the coach. It's Vaught Hemingway Stadium. It's the greatest tailgating. It's hard to describe the Grove. It really is. I finally took my wife there one time. She's like, I don't even understand this. And my wife grew up in Knoxville. It's just it is one of those things. But it shocks you when you go into the stadium, and it's such a tremendous place, and you see those years up on the wall, and you're right. It's SEC championships from the early '60s. It's national titles from that same window of time. And then the only other thing up there is a SEC West co-division championship. That's it, right? There's no Heisman's, there's no nothing. And so it shocks you when you go in there and you see the lack of awards. And so for them to finally earn a ring, because the players that were on that team there were the co-division champs, and it was Eli and Deuce and those guys. They played in the Cotton Bowl. It was a great team, but they have rings for their co-West Division championship. They didn't go to Atlanta to the SEC championship game, and people kind of poke fun of them for that. So to get a real ring, of any kind, to win an SEC championship after spending decades as a second-tier team. They weren't Vanderbilt, but they were just above Vanderbilt, right? I mean, you could make a pretty good argument Mississippi State's had a lot more success than they've had in the last 30 years. And so for them to do what they've done, the last thing we added to the documentary is, I remember we watched the cut, and I go, we need the one line that says, what he's done here, they haven't done in 60 years. And that's what we wrote, and for them to get used to double-digit wins, and for them to bump up against the playoff like they did a year ago, it was just a question of to me, it's just a question of when they finally get over the hump. I thought this team wasn't ready yet. I thought this team was a construction project, and so did he. And now there they sit, in the top 5 as we hit the second month of the season.
Yeah, pretty incredible. You mentioned Knoxville. I've loved our conversations over the years because of the comparisons between Tennessee and Nebraska, success that now is getting further and further in the rear view. But I guess, Ryan, since we really started honing in on that, Tennessee has pulled away in the discussion. They made the playoff last year. They're now always a mainstay in the top 25. I think this was supposed to be maybe a step back year for Josh Heupel and co, and they took Georgia again to the brink. Like, they're still unable to get over that hump. Where is Rocky Top at with the Josh Heupel Tennessee era to this point in time, do you think?
Well, you're right. I mean, like I said about Ole Miss being ahead of schedule, they're way ahead of schedule. Tennessee is. They had the personnel, but it wasn't just about losing a quarterback to the transfer portal like they did with I'm leaving. But they lost the best running back in the SEC last year. To me, the most underrated player in the SEC last year, led the nation in rushing. They lost their number one receiver. They lost a couple of key guys on defense. They lost a lot of players. And so I thought I had told all my Tennessee people, if the football tooth fairy comes to you and says, here's 8 wins and a Music City Bowl berth, you say thank you very much, because and Joey Aguilar is a kid at quarterback that I saw him a little bit at Appalachian State, which is just a couple hours from where I'm sitting here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and knew he was solid. But the coaching staff at App State were like, no, he has the potential to be really, really, really good. And then as soon as he walked in the building, which wasn't until the summer, as soon as he walked into the building in Knoxville, they said that he took on a leadership role. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do, especially for a team that had just made the college football playoff. And so, yeah, Tennessee's got it going. And the key is, when I'm on campus now, what I see all the time is I see the Chancellor Plowman, who's from Nebraska. I see Danny White, the athletic director, and I see Josh Heupel, and I see Tony Vitello, at least as of right now, the head baseball coach, and I see the men's basketball coach, women's basketball. They're all in a corner having a conversation. They're all on the same page, and That is unusual, man. You go into an
Yes.
athletic department, a lot of times the basketball coach doesn't talk to the football coach who's at odds with the athletic director, and the chancellor just wants them to take care of their business, don't want to get involved. Everyone at Tennessee right now, they're all rolling their oars in the same direction. And it's stunning what a difference it makes because, quite frankly, all the success they had in the 90s was kind of, it would kind of ran counter to what it was like being in the building because the administration and the AD and the football coach and nobody was on the same page. And so when everyone's on the same page, especially these days, it makes a huge difference. Nebraska's getting there, though. So we always talk about there was that 90s group, right? It was Florida State and Tennessee and Michigan and Nebraska. And they're all looking at each other like, what did we do? Because we used to be really good at this. And then Florida State, got on a run. And then Michigan wins a national championship. And then Tennessee makes the playoff. But, Nebraska's getting there. And the good news is, again, they were all stuck in that middle tier group we're talking about, where you get hung up in there and you might win 8 games, but that's the best you can do. And now, now I think you can fix those things faster than you used to. So, Nebraska, we used to always say they were going to meet at the tarmac somewhere and hug it out, right? Because I remember when Michigan made it to the finals of the College World Series, I think Tennessee was in the series that year. And I always said, well, since they're all in the same state, we should all just go have we should all just
a 90s party.
Yeah, go have a support group.
Yeah, do you see a breakthrough coming for Matt Rule in Nebraska this year, Ryan? Everybody's done the whole Matt Rule year 3 thing for months now. I know I was a part of it, trying to figure out if there are any lessons to be learned from Baylor and Temple that we could apply to this season. Is that necessary, do you think, or is it still okay to take the baby steps and think it's a little bit further down the road?
Well, the baby steps are bigger than they used to be, and now you can make leaps as opposed to baby steps like we talked about. But the schedule's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. They should have won that Michigan game, but was it Michigan State, Maryland, Minnesota? They got all the M's in a row. Northwestern's awful. I have no idea what USC's deal is. USC's at home. UCLA is a complete hot mess. So I mean, it's set up for a feel good year. That to me, that's the encouraging part. And I'm crazy about him. Again, that goes back to my when I did cover the Panthers fairly regularly. I like him a lot. And I like him because there's no BS there, but he's not a jerk. I like him a lot. And Nebraska has had a lot of no BS guys, and they've had at least one jerk and a couple jerks. And so it's he is to me, he's the right guy. And but it'll take. There's still obviously work to do. And there are issues, that brand. And I think that, quite frankly, this is what Tennessee struggled with, what Michigan struggled with, what Florida State struggled with, Nebraska, which is, that brand, though it means a lot to us and it means a lot to a lot of people, to a 17-year-old 5-star out of Detroit, it don't mean anything, because, I used to say this all the time to my Tennessee people, and they get so mad, but, they were recruiting on Jason Witten and Peyton Manning. And I would say, well, Jason Witten has retired and he's on TV, and, Peyton Manning is the guy on the insurance commercials. Like that's who they are to an 18-year-old. And people don't want to hear that, but that's a fact. And so, you have to be winning in the here and now before those things mean something to those kids. Because the reality is they just want to go somewhere and win football games. And so, but to me, it's definitely headed in the right direction. But I thought about that at the start of the year. I looked at their schedule, and when I looked at it, I went, this thing, there's, as I look at it right now, there's 2 teams with numbers next to their names. And the Big Ten is very good at the top, but there's a lot of room in the middle to make moves, right? Ask Indiana about that deal. And so you can jump when the time comes, you can jump pretty quick, but you've got to create a platform that you can go get recruits and transfers off of. And I think Matt's definitely doing that.
You mentioned earlier that you were at the Georgia-Alabama game. What level of concern should there be, Ryan, right now with the Bulldogs? I read a stat earlier today that it kind of did a double take on me. 4-3 in their last 7 Power 4 games, which is just so weird to think about given the recent success. Like, what are you seeing right now with the Bulldogs?
Well, and that's, and to Kirby Smart's credit, the last question of the press conference was about his now 1-7 record against Alabama. And his response to that was, well, what's everyone else's record against them? And it's a fair question because the reality is that, most of that, only 2 of those games were against a Kalen DeBoer Alabama team. All the rest of it was against his old mentor, Saban. And so that's a very fair question. And I think that probably that stat, most of that is rooted in Alabama as well, because it's not a lot of years they didn't just play him once, played him twice. And if they did play him, it was in an SEC championship game or international championship game. I don't think there's a super high level of concern. I think the biggest question mark for Georgia going into this year was Gunnar Stockton real? Because I was standing on the sideline at the SEC championship game when Gunnar Stockton, took over when Carson Beck was hurt. And I watched that team rally behind him, and his story is right out of a movie. The kid that just always wanted to play there, and now he is. And now he's for real. Now that you've seen him, he's for real. But the reality is they're also in the game. And they almost came back and won the thing. And I don't know if Georgia's getting enough credit for the fact that they were down, 24 or whatever it was, and or gave up 24 points in the first half. And then they made an adjustment and never gave up another point. And so they had a chance to win the football game against an Alabama team that people had written off incorrectly after that Florida State loss. Because, Marty and I both had talked to those Alabama guys. Marty had a great conversation with Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams was like, that's on the players. We had the game plan for Florida State. We believe in Kalen DeBoer. Ryan Williams admitted, we just rolled in there thinking these guys won 2 games last year. We'll be fine. And then by the time they realized they weren't fine, it was too late. And so, Nick Saban used to always like having a loss. Most of his national championships came with at least one loss. Mm-hmm. And he liked to lose a game because it was a wake up call. And that's what you hear the Georgia players talk about now is that's no fun, but in this world, it's not an elimination. And you might learn from that. So, and it's not like they weren't in it. Same for Penn State. Penn State came within what? If the guy jumped 4 inches lower, they would at least had a chance to win that game instead of an interception that started the overtime deal. So, as much as it hurts, how did you lose? Because if you were in the game, that's one thing. If you just get smacked in the face, that's a whole other conversation.
Ryan, looking away from the SEC, the Clemson start this year, I think even the most pessimistic people with the Tigers, and I was one of them, and yet I still was like, they'll win the ACC. I just didn't really buy into them having a big year. I didn't see this type of start coming. I can't imagine you did either. I've developed a theory over the last few weeks that while it's surprising that they're struggling when you look at Dabo's age, because he's only in his mid-50s. When you think about how long he's been a head coach, it makes a bit more sense to me, kind of like coaches in days gone by, as they get later and later into their career, they've started struggling as well. I wonder if that makes any sense in terms of how big of a step back it looks like they have taken in such a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and I think that some much bigger issues got kind of masked a little bit by the fact that they made the playoff last year, but the reality is they backed in. I mean, they played awful in November. They lose to South Carolina, and they kind of backed their way into the playoff. But now you're able to say, well, we made the college football playoff, and that's great. Mm-hmm. And won a conference championship, all those things. It reminds me, not to keep going back to Tennessee, it reminds me a lot of, the last 7 years of the Philip Fulmer era. You get a free pass on a lot of things when you've won a national championship or when you won, multiple conference championships. But he had 2 5-7 seasons over those last 5 years, and made a conference championship game by backing into it. The dominoes fell the right way, the exact same way that it went down for Clemson. And so, and I like Dabo a lot, but his unwillingness to adapt to the new system, because you're standing on principle, and the speeches about, the transfer portal, remember, compared to the Bible or something, I can't remember, but it was just all that. I always go back to that scene in Bull Durham. I wrote this in the bottom 10 a couple weeks ago. Clemson had the coveted 5th spot. that scene in Bull Durham where Crash holds up Nuke's. He said, "You got fungus on your shower shoes." And he said, if you win 20 games in the big leagues, you can grow fungus on your shower shoes, and the press will say you're colorful. If you're losing, then you're just a slob. And, and all these speeches that Dabo gives are phenomenal. I mean, I've always said he missed his calling as like, one of these revival preachers, right? And but that doesn't go off great, when you're struggling. And the speech he gave about I can go win somewhere else, he gave that same speech, at the start of his career when they were talking about, getting rid of him. And so it's getting a little testy down there. I mean, I graduated high school just up the road from Clemson. I got a lot of people wearing me out about it. But it's it's adopt or find something else to do. And now they got some transfer players this year, just a few, and they're willing to look at it a little bit. But I'm with you. I thought that the resume wasn't quite as impressive as what they actually did in 2024. And so the hype was a little out of control going into the start of this year. Now, I didn't think they'd be this bad. I didn't think they'd get housed like they have, on an almost weekly basis. But it's an interesting experiment to watch.
Certainly is. Two more, Ryan, before we let you go. I had Bill Connolly on the podcast before the season started to talk about his book, and you were quoted in that book quite a few times, making comparisons to the current state of college football, which we have talked about earlier in the conversation, that we like a lot of the things on the field, but also maybe the chase of the new fan, if you will. And you compared it to NASCAR, and I loved some of the things that you said in there, and because it made a lot of sense to me. I wonder when that idea first started percolating in your brain of like, this is starting to remind me of one of my other sports loves, and I don't really like what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, it was USC UCLA. It was the destruction of the Pac-12. I wrote a column then for ESPN.com, and it was the first time. And I had warned about this before, but the column I wrote then was, take it from me, you can when you're making money. It's kind of like what we were saying just now about, it masks a lot of problems when things are going well. So when TV ratings are up and everybody in the top tier is making money, and you can make a lot of bad decisions that feel like good decisions, because if you're making money, who cares, right? And so I worked at NASCAR in the middle part of like 2005 through 2007, and I would sit in those meetings, and there were a lot of people in that room that had come to work there that didn't care a thing about it and really didn't understand it. They had come from other places. This was a bridge job to another league. Brett Yormark, commissioner of the Big 12, he and I've talked about this because he was an executive at NASCAR back then. And everybody's making money, and TV ratings are through the roof, and, networks are striping big checks, and sponsors are the phone's just ringing off the hook for teams, for the conference or for the league, for racetracks, for everybody. The salespeople didn't have to sell. Like the phone was just ringing because everybody wanted to be a part of it. And the question was always, well, what happens when the plateau comes? Well, we're going to be a plateau. We're going to be fine. And so they started doing things like leaving Darlington on Labor Day weekend, and they created this really, really ugly race car that looked like a shoebox, the car tomorrow, which there were reasons for that, but putting a big wing on the back because of the Fast and Furious movies, which is why that happened, right? I mean, all these things were happening that were terrible ideas, and it was, but the biggest lesson was it was all too much at once. It wasn't one thing or two things or three things. It was 15 things. And it all happened all at once. And what I kept hearing in those meetings was, well, don't worry about it because our core fan base, that was the phrase that Brian France would use all the time. Our core fan base, they're going to stick around no matter what. Well, they didn't, because they woke up one morning and the sport that they were watching didn't look like what they fell in love with. And you have to evolve. I mean, we're talking about Lane Kiffin. You have to evolve. You have to grow up. You have to future-proof yourself. But when it comes to college football, you can't take away rivalry games that mean stuff to people. The SEC now, I thought, did an admirable job of trying to protect the three, but they also missed on a few of them. But there was talk 3 or 4 years ago about getting rid of the Tennessee-Alabama game. And I was like, what are you doing? Well, Tennessee hadn't won a game in 15 years. What the hell difference does that make? They've been playing since the 1890s. You can't be a prisoner of the moment. And so it's just things like that. But destroying the Pac-12 and USC, and I mean, no offense but the Nebraska UCLA game. Okay, or
It's so dumb.
last weekend the headliner was USC having to go and play at 9 o'clock in the morning, but UCLA had to do it too. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was on the West Coast working on a college game day story. I was in Corvallis and in Eugene, and they're all sad, and they're killing it at Oregon right now, but they're all just kind of like, this is great, and going to Penn State's awesome, but but we kind of miss playing Stanford, and we kind of miss playing US. Just those games, you can't take away. Saturday has to look like Saturday. That's what I keep saying. Saturday has to look like Saturday. This obsession with everything needing to be like the NFL. Hell, if I want to watch the NFL, I'll watch the NFL. And so that's the thing, is just being conscious of who you actually are and not worrying so much about, changing too many things all at once. That's what I worry about, and that's what I wrote about. But yeah, I've made that compare because I lived it, man. And NASCAR is way better off now than it was 10 years ago, but it's never going to get back to 2003. And the reason is because in 2003, a lot of people made a lot of really bad decisions because they thought they were really good decisions because they were making money.
Last one, Ryan. You've been with ESPN now since 1994. It's quite the moment to enter into ESPN in terms of the evolution of things, and I think you have done such a great job of always being able to adapt, always being able to do something different, the technological innovations that come, the way that sports fans take things in. What has that been like for you as your career has evolved? Because obviously you didn't see a documentary being on an app in 1994 because such a thing didn't even exist. But what's this been like for you?
It's crazy, man. First of all, when you start throwing those things around, I told my daughter, who's in college now, she's asked me about, being 50 and what does that mean? I said, well, what I've learned is that wisdom has nothing to do with being smart. Wisdom just means you've been around longer than everyone else, right? It's like that line in Groundhog Day where Bill Murray goes, I think God just has been around longer than everyone else because he's stuck in a loop or whatever. But it's been all I ever wanted to do is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's why I take very seriously. I was talking about Wayne Dreys down at University of Iowa, former coworker. I did a journalism class of his online the other day, and I was telling him, I said, I take very seriously that I know that what I get to go to these things. I mean, you feel the same way. We get to go to the College World Series, and we get to go to these football games, and we get to cover these events. And I take very seriously the job of, all right, guy who works at Bank of America, you don't get to be with me today between the hedges of Georgia, but I'm going to bring you with me, right? I want you to feel like you were here with me. That's our job. Our job is to take the people who don't have the privilege that we do to be there and make them feel like they're there. And so, but it's been crazy. My dad, I mentioned him earlier, my dad was a college football official. His first year in Division I was 1981. And his last game was the 2009 BCS championship game, Tebow and Bradford, Oklahoma and Florida. And he gets asked all the time about the difference in the game. And he's like, it was speed and it was technology and it was just the evolution. When he first started working games, a high scoring game was 17-14 and you'd have 5 times more punts than you did, passes. And then he retired, with Sam Bradford and Tim Tebow. Right. And so it's that, I mean, it's just, but at the end, much bigger as ESPN has gotten, and as so many of the faces have changed, the goal is the same. I mean, as corny as it sounds, it's that to serve sports fans anywhere, every time you walk on the campus of Bristol, that's the first thing you see painted on the side of the building, and that's the gig, man. That's take those sports fans and make them feel like they're there and give them what it is that they want. And but yeah, to go from being in the basement of the building in 1994 and popping in 2 tapes, like big videotapes, and rolling on Sonics Pacers, right, at 10 o'clock Eastern, and cutting a highlight for Stu Scott and for Chris Berman and for Bob Lee and those guys, Robin Roberts, Charlie Steiner, and all that, but in a little bitty studio, a little tiny studio. To go from that to, what we have now with the ESPN app, where literally you can watch anything you want, anytime you want to watch it. Evolution is that's the answer. It is rolling with what's next, future proofing. Our former boss, John Skirper, used to say all the time, future proofing. We got to future proof. And it's just that idea of looking into the future and what's coming next. And sometimes you hit and sometimes you miss, but it's, I'm lucky and I know that, but yeah, you start throwing around 1994. I was in a van. I work with all these young, good looking people, right? Jordan Rogers and Laura Rutledge and all that. And we were in a van one time. We were leaving the hotel in Atlanta to go over to the back then the Georgia Dome. And I'm riding in the back, and I made some pop culture reference. I don't even know what it was. And I look up, and the van fell completely silent. And I remember it was Marcus Spears and Laura Rutledge. I think Tebow was in there, and they were all just looking at me, and it was completely quiet. And I go, "What?" And Marcus Spears goes, "Damn, man, how old are you?" And that was the first time I realized I was way older than anybody else in the van. So, but by cracky, they're still inviting me. So I'm gonna stick around as long as they'll let me.
Yeah, I saw that the Breaking Bad series finale, the anniversary of it was 12 years ago the other day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that reference is going to be dated soon. And like I can't make Breaking Bad references for much longer.
And that's all my Instagram. You know, when I hit the little magnifying glass search bar, all my Instagram is now. Remember what it was like in the '80s, man? And now it's all. Remember what it was like in 2001? I'm like, what? It's just. But having a 20-year-old daughter helps because, like,
that's good.
I can we had the Rizzler was with us in Athens, and they're like, hey, the Rizzler is going to be on Marty McGee. Marty and I are like, awesome. And I'm immediately texting my daughter, who the hell is the Rizzler? She's like, he's the little kid from Jersey. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I was saying, but thank God I have a daughter who when she gets older, I don't know what I'm going to do, but she's my. I write these Sports Center essays every week for college football, and Taylor Swift's new album is dropping this week, as you know, and they wanted me to do this Taylor Swift themed thing, and I'm like, all right, guess what, girl? I told my daughter, you're co-writing this thing with me, man, because but whatever. It's trying to stay relevant and knock on wood, they keep sending me back. So,
well, I look forward to following along. He is Ryan McGee. You see him all over the place on ESPN, SEC Nation, Marty and McGee. He's on College Game Days doing essays there. I love the whiteout one ahead of the Oregon-Penn State game last week, and he is the author of numerous books, including one on the College World Series, The Road to Omaha, Hits, Hopes, and History at the College World Series. Ryan, this was awesome. I've never had a chance to talk to you for such a long time in one sitting. This was great. Thank you so much for joining the I-80 Club today. Safe travels the rest of the season.
Yeah, you and I have been friends for a long. I mean, we've been friends for a long time. But I think all the other conversations we've had over the last 15 years, you added up, it wasn't as long as this. So this has been great. I appreciate it.
Again, many thanks to Ryan McGee of ESPN for joining me this week on the I-80 Football Show. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, go through the archives. We have a lot of stuff that we're doing right now this season, especially on the I-80 Club podcast feed, on the I-80 Club YouTube channel. We have clips, we have full interviews, we have so much more. Go check all of that out. Another great college football guest on tap for next week. So hope to see you then, and also hope to see you coming up over the next few days with all of the things that we have going on, including the Big Ten Breakdown coming up Friday morning, Volleyball Late coming up Friday night, and then Saturday morning coffee show and the watch party for Nebraska and Michigan State on Saturday. Should be a really fun next few days here in the I-80 Club. Thanks again to Ryan McGee. I'm Josh Peterson. Thanks for watching or listening to the I-80 Football Show.